The cue push your hips back is making you do RDLs wrong because of what happens at your knees. If the RDL is a hip-based movement, why does it matter what happens at your knees? Your goal when doing an RDL is to work your hamstrings and glutes to the maximum. Therefore, what happens at your knees is vital because any load here is reducing what your glutes and hamstrings are actually doing. In this video, you'll learn why push your hips back is making your RDLs worse, what you need to think instead, and as a bonus, how you can manipulate the difference between glutes and hamstrings to make even more progress. Your glutes and hamstrings move your pelvis, but to optimize your RDLs, we're actually going to start by looking at your knees and your quads. In an RDL, energy leaking happens with your quads and reduces the loading of your glutes and hamstrings. More loading means more progress, therefore energy leaking means less progress. Why do your quads matter so much here? Your quads are primarily responsible for controlling knee extension and flexion, so controlling the bending and straightening of your knees. Therefore, if your knee is bending under load, your quads must be working. This is why thinking push your hips back is the #1 mistake made with RDLs. Can you spot the problem when we look at an RDL from sideways on? Pushing your hips back will result in a slight bend at the knee. You might be thinking that this doesn't look like a big deal. But think about your knee bend like a small hole in a pipe. If you run water through the pipe, some will leak out of the hole as it flows. The bigger the hole, the more water escapes, and this is how energy leaking works. The small bend at your knee leaks energy from your hamstrings and glutes to your quads. The bigger the knee bend, the more energy transfers over, and the more energy that escapes from your hamstrings and glutes, the less progress you make. I bet you've done this, and it's the most frustrating part of wanting to help people with their Romanian deadlifts. When people do RDLs and struggle to feel it in their hamstrings and glutes, they lean even harder into, I must push my hips back. This causes more and more knee bend and ends up making the RDL less and less effective. It can genuinely be a vicious cycle, but fortunately, there's a simple solution. Thinking hips back equals knee bend and energy leaking. Thinking hinge at the hips equals maximum hamstring and glute engagement. Do you know what the key to mastering the hip hinge is? It's understanding exactly why and how it works. Starting with why, visualize your muscles as resistance bands. They attach to your bones and pull. In an RDL, we're aiming to use your hamstrings and glutes. They both attach to the back of your pelvis and the back of your legs. As you tilt forwards, the muscles lengthen and take the load. This is a good thing because load means work and work means progress. As you stand back up, the muscles contract or pull. Can you see that the hamstrings and glutes do not work based on how far back your hips go? They work based on how far your pelvis tilts relative to your legs. Therefore, for optimal ham and glute progress, we need to maximize the angle of your hip hinge without bending your knees. No knee bend means no energy leaking. When we get to the bonus shortly, we'll even be able to manipulate the balance between hamstrings and glutes. But how do we maximize your hip hinge and hip angle? This part is all about conscious control, and here's how to shortcut your way to learning it. Use your hands and find your pelvic bones. Keep your thumb and finger on your pelvis and practice tucking and untucking whilst standing up. Why are we doing this? By feeling your pelvis, you'll be able to hip hinge with perfect effectiveness. The next step is to hinge over, still with hands on your pelvis. Your upper body stays perfectly still and is hinged over because your pelvis is moving relative to your legs. Your knees are no longer bending because we aren't just pushing backwards. Remember how the angle of pelvis relative to leg dictates how much hamstring and glute engagement we get? This is how we perfect the RDL. You can now maximize your hamstring and glute loading by thinking hinge at the hips rather than hips back. The final step is to add your weight. Because your knees are no longer bending, you're not experiencing energy leaking into the quads. This means your hamstrings and glutes will be taking the full proportion of the load. Subsequently, you may feel this more. Don't be surprised if you RDL a little less weight, but you can confidently know that you're getting a more effective use of the muscles you actually want to target. What about the bonus tip I mentioned to manipulate the balance between hamstrings and glutes? Let's take a look at a very simple trick you can pull off now that you know how to hip hinge correctly. Your hamstrings and glutes can be focused on independently by changing where your center of gravity is. Watch as I keep my hip hinge at the exact same angle, but rock slightly forwards onto my toes and slightly back onto my heels. When you rock onto your toes, your hamstrings take on more of the load than your glutes. When you rock onto your heels, your glutes take more of the load. The way you can use this hack is simple and effective. If you really want to target your hamstrings, just rock forwards and keep your weight more in your toes. For maximum glute progress, keep back on your heels. Remember that the hip hinge angle is exactly the same and we still aren't bending your knees. We're just rocking forward or backward. If you want equal hamstring and glute contribution, just stay centered. There's a huge reason that hinge at the hips works so much more effectively than hips go back. We're training by considering how your anatomy actually works. By focusing on controlling the angle of your pelvis, we can completely prevent energy leaking. Even though your quads were only involved a little, they were still stealing load from the muscles you wanted to target. Now that you understand how and why the hip hinge works, you can truly maximize your hamstring and glute progress with the RDL. For more health and fitness insights delivered from experience and with integrity, subscribe to me. Thanks.